All right, it seems that we're live, guys, for another phenomenal episode here on the Entrepreneur Speaker Series. And today we have a friend from across the border, our neighbors. And before I give her a warm welcome here on the show, I want to give a little bit of background because today's episode is special. We're going to be diving into the purpose and goals and dreams because Jennifer James, right? She is currently an entrepreneur helping lots of people develop their goals and dreams and developing breakthroughs in their businesses. But before she got here, right, she had a very interesting lifestyle. She was working in corporate and she is also an award-winning television producer. But I'm going to allow Jennifer to dive into that. But the goal today is, guys, to take away from the lessons that it took Jennifer in her journey and the breakthroughs that she has experienced that made her the entrepreneur today. And as you know, the Entrepreneur Speaker Series is all about providing the lessons and give you the encouragement to take those same decisions, because we believe that you can achieve anything that you want in life by just making a decision. Right. So with no further ado, I want to introduce us to Jennifer James. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. So nice to be here.
I'm so happy to have you today, Jennifer. I'm very, very excited. And can you, before we dive in, can you tell us a little bit about the life in Toronto at the moment? We were talking about that earlier, right? But we have so many audiences in the US. So how's the life currently in Toronto?
Yeah, I'm sure it's similar to some of the states. We are obviously feeling the pressure of the pandemic, and that's real. Yeah. And so we are in a version of lockdown. Our government has been very supportive, and we find ourselves kind of on this tipping point of moving out of one stage where our restaurants are starting to open again, and we're finding ourselves transitioning to where we can kind of connect a little bit more directly with people, which is nice.
Yeah.
And so I would say, and for Toronto, for those of you who have never been here before, we are now in our transition from fall into winter. It's a beautiful time of year here. And I just love Toronto as a city. It's a beautiful city, born and raised, and it's a great place to be. So that's what I would say about Toronto right now.
That's excellent. It seems that despite the pandemic, you're still keeping positive, right? And there's plenty for you to enjoy, even though sometimes, because here in the US, we have had these cycles, right? From the beginning, we had the lockdown, we experienced them several times. And I believe that it requires a little bit of patience. And of course, you have to be focused on something. You need to have a purpose so you won't drive each other completely nuts being stuck in the house. But it seems that Toronto is treating you well because you still bring a lot of energy and smiles to this call here today. So it seems that all is good.
Yes. Yeah. And I would say, and I'm grateful to be in Canada and to be part of the Toronto community. And I think because of that, we haven't had our challenges as a city and as a country, but generally we've had a very positive experience through the pandemic. And I look at the pandemic overall as a silver lining and an opportunistic challenge.
Yeah.
And, I did a presentation earlier this week about how you can use COVID as a crutch. And how do you flip the lid on that? And so I think in general, it's your mindset. When you talk about purpose, connecting your purpose to the opportunities that you have in these bigger experiences is actually a very meaningful way to get through some of the bigger challenges in life.
That's beautiful. And you said earlier on, you said gratitude, right? You mentioned twice already that you're grateful. Now, how does gratitude play a role in what you do?
Oh, that's such a good question. As you know, I'm a mindful business coach, and I practice myself, and my mindset now is embedded in mindfulness. And so what does that exactly mean? So mindfulness at its core is about being aware of your experiences in the present moment. So just really being present and aware of how you feel, the sensations that you're having in every single present moment experience. And that's, that sounds, it's like, okay, well, that sounds, maybe that sounds easy to some people, and maybe it sounds a little bit complex to others, right? And so where gratitude comes into that is it's a practice, it's a technique, and it's a tool to really bring a positive experience to your present moment. And it's a way for you to connect not only to yourself, but to others, to really kind of, again, I go back to kind of flipping the script a little bit, but really bringing awareness to all of the little things, and sometimes even the bigger things in life that are really positive around you.
And I want to, sorry, I wanted to dive in a little bit because you mentioned tool, right? Gratitude is a tool. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? Because I have had many conversations, and I'm a firm believer of gratitude. Like you mentioned, it goes into the little things. But overall, right, if you're just grateful for life and what you're currently working on and the people that are around you, it allows you to pull you forward, even in times of a pandemic like these. But there's also people, they are more on the science-based side, right? They're like, oh, gratitude, how does this benefit me while the world is, look at the news, right? So maybe can you dive in a little bit and explain what you mean by gratitude can serve you as a tool?
It can. So I'm sure maybe you've heard this because you've spoken to people, but gratitude is an attitude, right?
Mm-hmm.
So gratitude is an attitude. So it's something that you can use to practice every single day. And if you, as part of your intention in everything that you do, you purposefully make it part of your daily practice. And in that way, it becomes a tool that you're using in your system of what you do as part of your routine. And you practice every single day. And by doing that, you slowly shift your attitude. And so by being a little bit more conscious, and we go back to mindfulness and the purpose of mindfulness, you're intentionally and consciously shifting what you do, how you do it, and being more purposeful in what you're delivering. And so whether you're doing it yourself, you're doing it with someone in your family, you're doing it with your kids, you're doing it with your team at work, it's like, it just takes one moment to show gratitude.
Yeah. And if we can relate that to, let's say, here in the US, and I'm not sure about the situation in Canada, but here in the US, a lot of small businesses got affected by COVID, right? Especially retail business that got shut down, and they had a first wave, a second wave. And all of a sudden, they found that they weren't positioned as well enough. So it really killed their business. It's killed the cash flow. And a lot of people, especially here, and even around my home area, I saw a lot of businesses having to close shop. How can a business in kind of crisis times, or when there's a lot of uncertainty, how can you use gratitude as a tool to keep focused, right? To remain positive, and like you said earlier on, to turn 2020 maybe even in your best year yet?
Yeah. So you say that, and I have immediate compassion, because it's not just for me. And I go back to gratitude is one piece of a bigger whole. We have the same experience here. Small businesses, even big businesses, are being impacted, and people personally are being impacted. But focusing for a moment on small businesses that have really struggled in this time. And my immediate practice for people is to stop for a moment and just have a little bit of compassion for yourself in the situation. And while absolutely gratitude is a next step, but I think first and foremost is take a moment to just recognize how this is making you feel, because we often don't stop and actually allow ourselves to just feel in the moment. And that is a very important and powerful practice that we can have, is to really just take a moment, stop, and recognize how we're feeling and allow ourselves to feel. because there's a lot of perception around emotions, especially challenging ones.
Yeah.
And this is a really difficult time. And there's a lot of difficult emotions that are coming up for business owners.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot out there to help them, and business owners, or even, I'm going to say even parents and entrepreneurs, to actually manage these types of emotions: anger, frustration,
anxiety,
fear. Fear is a big one, right?
Yeah.
And so the first step in actually managing these types of emotions is actually noticing when they're present.
Awareness.
Yeah. Awareness, and just being, okay, it's here.
Mm-hmm.
And saying to yourself, it's here. Hello, anger, hello, resentment, hello, obligation. I see you, and labeling that and allowing yourself to feel it and being okay with the fact and recognizing it's normal, that you're not alone, and that a lot of people around you, there's common humanity in that. And so the gratitude part comes in to say that, yes, I recognize that I'm experiencing all of these. There's a lot of common humanity in that, and allowing yourself to feel it, but then saying that, okay, but there are things around me that I can be grateful for. Not everything is something to be angry about. Let me stop and pause and recognize that there's so many other things around me that, and maybe it's some of the small things, like the fact, here I'll use an example in Toronto, but our government has provided us with alternate measures for funding, for temporary funding. They have stepped in and looked at and redone our unemployment benefits. So there's a great example, and those are big ones, but maybe a small one is just like, I got up this morning, I got out of bed, and I made it to work. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah.
And, I showed up for my employees today.
Yeah.
And I answered all my emails today. It doesn't have to be, gratitude is not about, it's what works for you, and allowing yourself to recognize that, which is something that I don't think everybody stops and does.
Yeah. No, you're right. And in the US, I think we are the example of that. That we have a tendency to just keep going and going. And of course, there's certain areas like New York City, which are phenomenal examples where everything is just the city that never sleeps, right? We just keep going and we never stop to reflect and to look inside ourselves and what is actually around us, the things that we have accomplished, or like you mentioned, the daily little things that drive you forward, right? Are we, do we acknowledge them or do we take them for granted?
Yeah, I call it the doing mode. It's just like we get so caught up in doing. To your point, we don't often reflect and move out of that automatic mode and just allow ourselves to be, and to really relish and savor some of that being.
Yeah. So Jennifer, so we find ourselves almost already at the end of 2020, right? The time has gone by so incredibly fast. So we're in November, transitioning. Next month, we're heading into the Christmas season. So in your business and with your clients, what is it that you do at this moment to help your clients really turn the pandemic, the 2020, from a chaotic year into maybe a more focused year, and take them over the finish line to really make an impact, right? To take this as a last sprint. Can you share some of your mechanisms and your teachings that you implement with your clients to give them that breakthrough?
Absolutely. So a lot of the work that I do is really bringing together mindfulness, helping people understand the benefits and the values of a mindfulness mindset, but bringing that together with the creative process. So marketing and branding, and making sure that they're doing that with ease. And so what do I mean by that? That sounds a little bit like, okay, but it's really about building that mindful mindset. So transitioning it from a practice to a mindset so that it's practical and sustainable. because I know that it works. I've lived it. I've done it. I've been embodying it for over 10 years, and it's transformed my life. And then seeing how to actually integrate that into your business and everything that you do. A lot of the work that I do is really around setting you up with how to use storytelling and having a vision and a purpose for your business that will enable you to level yourself up and move your business and scale and grow your business in a meaningful way. And so it's really bringing those two things together so you can accelerate as a business owner.
So how important do you believe is branding and storytelling for a business today in 2020, right? Where everything lives on the internet. How important is it to have a well-distinguished brand?
It's your secret weapon is your story. And your story is connected to your brand. So I'll explain that just quickly. Your brand is your identity. It's how people understand and how you create clarity with your customers. So your brand is basically broken into two parts. Your strategy, which is your vision, your mission, your values, your why. And that's like the higher architecture. It's all your communication touch points.
Yeah.
And then it's the visual execution of your brand, right? So your logo, your word mark, your positioning, all of those pieces, right? And then the storytelling is kind of the secret sauce, the finesse that comes out of it. So how do you share that with the world? How do you connect and get your customers, your clients, the people around you to understand who you are? How do you make meaning out of that? And you own your story. Your story is your identity. So getting that out into the world in a meaningful way comes out by knowing your brand power and then authenticating it through your story.
Yeah.
And so really building powerful storytelling is the best way to get out there and share your message with the world.
Beautiful. And on that note, I'm getting some questions from the audience watching this right now, and they're asking, Jennifer, what is your framework to build a compelling story if you would have to start from scratch?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the very first step to building a story, and you may, that, and we get this all the time, is people are like, I don't know where to start.
Yeah.
So stories start with purpose. So I always say story is packed with purpose. And so what does that mean? So when I say that, you're like, okay, how do I find my purpose?
Yeah.
And so I go back to when you're really clear on what you stand for with your brand, you're already packed with purpose. You're really clear on your vision, your mission, your why. You've got all these thread lines of your story. But I'll give you an example. And this is like a little exercise I do with people to help them really start to think about, how do I come up with storytelling purpose-packed statements? There's two things you want to do. One is think about what type of story do I want to tell? And I can share like a guideline of how, like the different types of stories. Yeah. But then you want to think about, let's think about like a defining moment in your life. Like one example, and this is where you start to crack the can of vulnerability, because vulnerability creates connection. You want to go back to like a defining moment in your life. And it might be, so I'll give you an example. I talk about how the art of mindful storytelling became important to me. Mm-hmm. And the story and the history behind that. Being able to share that story and that connection with people creates relatability, intention, and awareness for my audience, right? Mm-hmm. So thinking about that defining moment, and that actually comes from the story of my mother and my mother's struggle with illness and chronic illness in my childhood. Mm-hmm. And how she was a representation of fierceness. She was a warrior. She was my strength and my pillar of just everything mindfulness.
Yeah.
Because she was always showing up and she was always present no matter what. But she was also chronically ill through my whole childhood, through her whole life. She was always about being courageous. And through my childhood years, she would always be there at the PTA meetings, and she would always be hosting our birthday parties, and she would always be, you know, that fierce warrior that I knew her to be, right? That's what she was in my mind. But sometimes I knew she was doing it from bed because she was sick and she was chronically ill. But I never associated that message. She didn't come across to me as being disabled or sick or frail. She always came across as fierce. And it was because she was present. And I do recall, like, we would have these times where we would go down to, and I'll say the Toronto Blue Jays games, and we would have to turn around and come home. But she always did it with this level of confidence and courage, right? And I never had FOMO, fear of missing out is what we call it today.
Okay.
Right? It was just our normal. Change was our normal. Adaptation, being compassionate, because that's what she taught us.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening was, over time, she just continued to give us these messages, but she also told us stories. And in times of difficulty, to share a message, to teach us a lesson, to guilt trip us, she was always sharing stories with us. And that's where I learned storytelling. And so what I'm trying to share with you guys here is defining moments in your life, because she's the reason why storytelling is important to me.
Yeah.
And she's the one that taught me that storytelling is what connects us and creates power.
Yeah. And I see another question coming in about that point. It's saying, okay, so you identified that your mom had a big influence on what you do today, or at least a storytelling aspect of it, because that's how you remembered growing up. So do you have a tip for the viewers watching this today? They're saying, look, I'm not sure, I'm not aware at this moment of my own defining moments. Do you have tools or like a framework where you say this is a starting point? Because sometimes it takes some digging right into memory lane to find these defining moments. Because I found, Jennifer, and you let me know what you think, but I found that a lot of these defining moments, they are so part of you that at a conscious level, you're not aware of them, not always at least. But then on a subconscious level, when you do the work, you can able to bring them back, to bring them forward until they become so obvious to you, like, aha. And I call them my aha moments, right? But sometimes they live on the subconscious level. So on the forefront, they're not always obvious. So how would you say you go about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the ways, and you know, one thing that I'll say to everybody who's watching right now is, one kind of trick and tip that I use with people is oftentimes I'll say, write down 3 things that you feel. Like when
3
you wake
things that you feel
right now, like when you wake up, when you could do it right now, even after I just told you my story.
Yeah.
Or when you wake up in the morning, or when you're thinking you want to start being creative or writing, just write down 3 emotions that you're feeling. And then I want you to think back to a time in your life when you felt that way, a moment in time, and take a moment and write a couple of sentences about that experience. And that's an exercise that I often do in some of my storytelling workshops, because that is the starting of a defining moment in a story.
Do you in those moments, do you just let your thoughts that come to mind, right? You're asking to write down 3 emotions, and then once you think about them, I can just imagine that a whole lot of emotion starts to flow. So would you
Definitely.
say you just allow yourself to flow freely and then script it out, whatever comes to mind?
Yeah, so that's the first step, right? Is the first step in storytelling is finding your purpose and finding your defining moment, right? So it's like once you have that, then there's an architecture for writing a story. I'm happy to share with everybody. We have like I have a 5-step guide that's super easy to follow,
Beautiful.
and I can share that with you to really get to the next phases in storytelling.
Yeah.
And so that you can use it every single day to craft, whether it's something that you're trying to write to post on social media, or if you're trying to actually craft a story for a blog or any type of storytelling vehicle. It's really a 5-step process that my husband and I have really put together. My husband's a writer and a director.
Yeah.
As you mentioned before, we have a production company. So this is the process that we've been using for many years that really helps to guide the writing process. So I'm happy to share that. Yeah.
Yeah. So guys, Jennifer is happy to share the framework. So if you want to get this, let us know on the chat right now if you want to get this, right? And our team will make sure that we find a way to get this to you, okay? But if you want to get your hands on the framework that Jennifer has used to produce award-winning shows, then let us know. And Jennifer will be generous to share her framework with you.
No problem. Absolutely. And just remember, it starts with being that packed with purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your framework is, would you say that's your framework is a way for you to define those moments, go back to the past and really dig deep and find those defining moments. And that would be the starting point of building the story.
Absolutely. And, it's really about making sure, because again, there's a little bit of, you have to make sure that what you're saying is connecting.
Yeah.
And is relatable, right? So there is a little bit of why you want to have your brand strategy in place, because that really defines who you are, coming from your values. And so you want to make sure that what you're sharing is really through your voice, and the message that you're creating as you're writing your story is coming across really authentically and is going to make meaning to your audience. And so the more you know about your brand and what you stand for, and you've done that work, it's so important. It really helps tee you up to have your voice sound really crisp, clear, and strong.
And Jennifer, so we have in our audience, we have people that have been in business for many years, but they may have never developed a brand story, right? They may have never developed that unique story. So the question that I have for you, which I would love you to elaborate on, is: do you think it's an absolute must, regardless of the industry that you serve, regardless if you're in the e-com space, if you're an actual retail shop, whatever it is that you currently do or that you're trying to pursue, do you think that storytelling and having a well-defined story is essential to making an impact on your audiences?
I do. So we know that it's because it's not only about connecting to external audiences, it's also about connecting to internal audiences. So it's about power of the people. And no matter what you do, you're building relationships.
Yeah.
And storytelling is a really great way to build trust, to build respect, provide clarity and communication. And today we have a real kind of fractured communication funnel.
Yeah.
So when you think about the way we communicate, text messaging, emails, there's a lot of assumptions and insinuations that are being made. And so storytelling is a very powerful tool for business owners to bridge the gap. And so we also talk about creating a memorable moment with storytelling. You want to have impact on your people. a story is a very powerful way to connect and create a memorable moment with people.
Yeah.
So there's so many benefits, not just from a brand story perspective, but over an overarching perspective on all verticals in terms of your people and your brand and engagement across the board.
And so I think that a lot of people have heard about a personal brand and then there's a company brand.
Right.
So do you see them separate? Do you see that those two things are separate? And what would you advise if somebody's struggling saying, hey, I have this idea, right? It's not per se about me, but I have a product that I'm developing, or I'm building an app or like a platform. So how does storytelling come into play in both of these areas? Or maybe it's the same thing. What are your thoughts on the personal branding versus the corporate branding?
Yeah, so I would say that depending on the size of your business, so I would say really that sort of depends a little bit, right? So when you get into corporate branding of large organizations, that is definitely more of a corporate brand story. So when you're talking about a company like a Walmart, I'll say, for example, like a big retailer, they have a very strong corporate brand structure, right? Even some of the bigger financial institutions, health organizations, not-for-profits.
Yeah.
That's very much what you would see as a common brand structure.
So you see a little bit less of the personal from the first person voice, but it's more geared towards a bigger vision and a mission as a corporate entity.
Well, here's where I'm going to challenge that a little bit, because a lot of them, Howard Schultz, Starbucks, Sam Walton, Walmart, they started out as entrepreneurs. And the thread of the power of who they are always was the fact that they were very much about sharing their stories. And they were not scared to do that. And they were so connected to their people. And their businesses thrived no matter how large they got because of that. You know, Isadore Sharp, Four Seasons Hotels. The biggest and strongest customer and employee engaged companies are because these individuals started off as entrepreneurs who were not scared to share their stories, be vulnerable, be authentic, show up as their true selves, and really worked from the ground up with their people. And so I would say that those are examples of like where they started off as like, you know, Sam Walton started off as one little store in Arkansas. Izzy Sharp started off as one hotel here in Toronto and have become global national organizations. That may not be the intention of some people. That, you know, you may be starting off as you just want to build your business and you're an entrepreneur and you're happy to have your one business. But the more vulnerable you're willing to be, the more you're willing to open up and share your stories, the more you connect with your people regardless. And so there is value in having your brand story. And as you get bigger, that may separate from your personal story. But at no time is there ever not an opportunity for you to always be authentic to you.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. It's an evolution of self, because I've always believed, and in my coaching practices, I always teach this to my students. And the business is really a reflection of you. Just that you build a product or a service, that doesn't make it separate, because you're the driving force, the engineer behind the ideas and how it's supposed to operate. So the business is always a reflection of you. And so therefore your personal story is very much involved into that.
Absolutely. Now, it doesn't mean your face is on the package, but you know, there's extremes. And I've definitely seen a lot of extremes, but but I think that there are definitely great best in class examples of how to grow your brand and really be a visionary in an organization, and still really be what I call a mindful and purpose-driven business, which means you are connected to your people, you're connected to your vision, and that never really moves away. You don't move away from that, regardless of how big you become.
Yeah, that allows you to pull you forward, to keep focused.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And Jennifer, so you have worked for a long time, right? Producing, you were in the television space and in the production for 20 years, I believe. You had a corporate track record for over 20 years. Is that correct?
Yes. So I have, I kind of have two, and this is what a lot of people have, is they wear two hats. So I've worked corporate for over 20 years, and I own a production company with my husband.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
So what have you learned in the time of and especially the production company? Because I would like to keep and touch upon the storytelling aspect. But what have you learned from producing, series, videos, documentaries, right? Where the storytelling aspect is a very strong component, but people might think, okay, but you apply the storytelling because you're into the television space, but how does this relate to business? So can you share some of those lessons in how you found that the actual journey in production is very much applicable to building a business?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say, and this is it's such an interesting journey. So we started our production company when we met. And we actually met and got married. And we basically,
in that order.
well, we met on a dance floor, and we got married 3 months later.
Wow.
And he proposed to me 48 hours after we met.
Wow. That was love at first sight.
Love at first sight. And 3 days after we got married, we incorporated our production company.
Wow. Talking about speed of implementation.
That's right. No time like the present.
Yeah.
Best decision I ever made in my life. He's not only my business partner, but he's my partner in life. And and we have been building our production company since that day. We did what we were working on at that time was our first documentary film. And at that point, and I remember this vividly, the night that I met my husband, he shared with me his vision. And that was the first time I had met someone so convicted on their purpose. I had seen people on TV that were convicted in their purpose, never really met someone that was as convicted. And that's what I think drew me, partially what drew me to my husband was he's a very passionately convicted person. Yeah. And he was an entrepreneur. And at that point in my career, I wasn't. I'd been working corporate my whole life. I didn't know what it meant to be an entrepreneur. And so he really brought me in, and we decided to go on this journey together as partners. And that was the start of my shift from just being a marketer in an organization, which has its own purpose around storytelling, because in marketing and branding, you're sharing stories on the corporate level. Yeah. But really shifting my experience and bringing it in to support our journey as entrepreneurs. And those were the most fascinating, challenging years of my life. That starting off in that business, because we knew nothing about building a business. It was I liken it to blindfold darts. The first few years of us building our business, it was exactly that. We were just throwing darts at a wall and guessing at guessing at everything that we do. I mean, even when we incorporated our business, we didn't know that whether we should incorporate or we shouldn't. We just kind of were I think this is the right thing to do. So I think we'll incorporate our business. Yeah. And we went ahead and spent all that money when we didn't really have all that money on incorporating. So, but storytelling, and my husband has always been a storyteller. His background is in film and television. He went to school for it. And in that realm was newer for me with experiencing that. And in the film and television world, and I would say today, it's totally different than it was back then. Like, I can't even hand over fist the amount of changes that have happened in that industry.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. So when people, and I look at the statistics and the results of like how our both the US and the Canadian market struggle with the pace of technology and the changes, and that's one of the drivers of our trust index falling, our global trust index falling. I think about it like even 7 years ago, and the pace of technology and what was driving, and that was what was driving the changes in the film and television industry, was all of these rapid changes in technology.
Yeah.
Right. And that was changing how we showed up as storytellers.
Yeah.
And so keeping up with that has been something that has been one of our greatest challenges.
A quick question. So right today, right, you have your framework of how to build that compelling story. Yeah. Now, would you say that the framework has shifted, or the framework remained the same, just the way that you tell the stories has changed?
Yeah, no, the framework is pretty lock in step. The where, how, and who, and when. It has really changed. So if you think about,
you're still relying on some solid storytelling principles that have attested the test of time. They still apply today. It's just the variables have changed because the landscape has changed. The technology, the perception of this day and age that we live in has changed.
Yes. And the relevancy of storytelling has changed. So we go back to, storytelling's been around since the cavemen, since the dawn of time.
Yeah.
It's been one of the primary mediums of communication.
And I always think of the Romans. When the Roman army went to conquer and they would just slaughter a whole village or a kingdom, they would always leave that one person alive and go to tell the story.
That's absolutely right. Same with the Egyptians. It's been the method of communication for so many different cultures, and it's a common thread across culture. So no matter, and when I think about today and how we're rebuilding how we communicate and how we share and how we break down cultural barriers, I go back to storytelling is one of the best ways to kind of break that or bridge that gap, because it's a gateway of communication to create that, connectivity and relatability. To your point, back in the Roman times, that's why they were doing it, right? It was a message delivery. It was an impact statement. Yeah. Well, it's no different today.
Yeah.
Right? It's knowing how to do that and doing it in a way powerful. That communicates it clearly. And I go back to that clarity so that you can build trust and resonate with people.
Yeah. Wow. So good. So it sounds to me, Jennifer, that regardless of the business that you're in today or the business that you are looking to build, but I think everybody understands that in order to build a business, you need to have an audience. So what I get away from what you're sharing with us today is that the best way to connect with an audience is through storytelling, is through to putting all of you and the lessons and what you stand for and your purpose and your big vision into the story, so you can relate that to an audience. So it's not that you just have a phenomenal product or service, but people actually buy from people whom they like and trust.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And there's different ways to do that. So you don't have to feel like you're sharing the same story all the time. And that's the beauty of, we all have a world of experience. We all have a large, database of stories that we can share.
Yeah.
And a lot of learnings from those. And that's what people they'll learn from you. They'll identify with you. And that's the importance and the purpose of storytelling.
Wow. So great, Jennifer. I really appreciate, because I think that especially you mentioned technology, it becomes so obvious to watch other people's stories, right? Everything that lives online, movies, we have YouTube, we have so much video content on social media platforms. It's easy to forget your own story. That's my perception, at least, that you're watching stories all the time, but it's so easy to forget your own story. So I think one of the things that I found most valuable today is, to all the entrepreneurs watching this, do you have a clear and compelling story that resonates with the audience or that segment of the market that you're trying to reach, right? And if not, maybe now, especially 2020, when we're at home anyway, it's a good time to focus. And perhaps, Jennifer, we can get, after this interview, you can share that format, right? Your framework with us to give people the tools to build that story so they can make an impact in 2021.
Absolutely. Yes, 100%. I'm happy to share the framework. And I just love making storytelling easy for people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's my pleasure. Absolutely. Anytime. That makes me very happy.
And Jennifer, you have been very, very generous with your time and all the lessons shared here today. Now, there's one more thing that we always like to do inside these, in our communities, right? Because we were chatting backstage here, I mentioned to you that we always like to give something to the community. The reason of the existence of this particular show is to teach the lessons by phenomenal entrepreneurs that have gone through these journeys, because there's usually a lot of lessons in that journey that people can implement in their own journeys. And one of the things that I always like to do is, besides your framework, people are asking, how can I get in touch with Jennifer, right? If I want to learn more about building a story, and if I want to even learn how to implement the framework, perhaps, is there a way, Jennifer, that maybe we can make some time available to them to perhaps, spend 20 to 30 minutes and addressing some of these questions, give them an introduction to your work and the phenomenal work that you have done so far throughout your career, and how you are applying that today in the lives and businesses of your clients?
Absolutely. I would be happy to sit down with anybody for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and do a one-on-one chat. And you can reach me through my website at doublejlifestyle.com.
doublejlifestyle.com. And we make sure, guys, that our team is here to capture all that information, right? So after this episode, we will add that to the show notes so no information gets lost here.
The other thing I'll just mention is we're launching a new program, The Art of Mindful Storytelling, which is a certification program for people to become certified mindful storytellers, and that's coming in the new year. So
very exciting.
That's another great opportunity for people.
So you can become a certified storyteller.
That's right. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome. So if you want to take advantage of this, guys, and we're gonna be sharing the information and how to get in touch with Jennifer. So even if you get Jennifer's framework, then take advantage of this, right? And ask your questions, because storytelling, as we learned here today, is so incredibly powerful, but in the same time, it gives you direction, gives you vision, right? It connects you with an audience. So if you want to turn your business around in 2020 and take that final sprint to make this your focused and best and most effective year yet, then connect with Jennifer and ask her about the framework, and try and leverage that time that Jennifer so generously made available to build that story. Because I feel personally that a lot of the entrepreneurs that are trying to build a business, this is what is missing: a compelling story. They're driven to bring products and services into the market, but the connection piece is missing.
I would agree.
Wow. That's so great. Jennifer, I really thank you for joining us today on the show. It was very liberating. It was lots of golden lessons today. And I hope we can do this again sometime early in the spring, because we're all excited about your new program, right? Certified Storytelling. That's very exciting. So maybe we can bring you back on the show sometime in the spring to see how your evolution has continued to grow and to find out the results and how you're able to change so many businesses of the people that you work with.
Thank you. I would love that. That would be great.
And then finally, Jennifer, it's November 2020. If there would be one last lesson that you could share, that you're willing to share to make an impact, what would you say to the people currently watching this?
Yeah, there's always one thing that I say to people, to teams, which is small steps to big change. And so believe in the little things. I go back to gratitude. Gratitude is a small step to big change. I
figured you would, yes.
So it doesn't take, you don't have to always be focusing on the big things. Sometimes it's just take a step back and focus on the small steps and you'll get big change.
Wow. So guys, there you have it. Be grateful of the little things and have faith, right? I believe that's what you're saying. Have faith and believe that you're on the right track. Mm-hmm. And take advantage of the framework to build that story that will propel you forward. Jennifer, I appreciate you so much. Thank you for coming onto the show, guys. I hope this encouraged you guys. Connect with Jennifer. Take advantage of this. And next week, we are back here with a phenomenal new episode. And as always, same time, same place. And for now, thank you so much for tuning in. Jennifer, James, we really appreciate you. And we look forward to speaking to you again sometime in the spring. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Greetings from Austin and across the border to our neighbors. Have a great time, Jennifer. Thank you.